Hello. There we go. That's the thing I was waiting for to happen. Hello, friends. Greetings. Happy Wednesday. Happy 5th of July. And entering into this full moon on the 16th now of Tammuz in the Jewish calendar. Continuing with our series, which is now completing almost a full year of taboo topics, of learning and practicing having difficult conversations. Much of those conversations this past year have revolved around matters of death and end of life. And we've introduced also some relevant hot topics, as it were, political topics. Can everybody hear me okay online? So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Given the season now, sort of on the heels of the 4th of July, wanted to take this opportunity to have a conversation about the concept or of American exceptionalism, some of the roots in terms of American history, and also some of the antecedents in terms of sort of pre-American history and pilgrims, religious freedom based, and those initiatives often rooted in Hebrew scripture, Hebrew Bible, and the connection to the notion of chosenness, which was particularly highlighted by Mordecai Kaplan in the 40s of the 20th century, in addressing the notion of chosenness, which, as we'll talk about, has a lot of connection to this notion of American exceptionalism. And when I'm looking online and looking at the topics, the topic of you Google American exceptionalism, one of the sort of the first things that pop up are discourses on how American exceptionalism as a concept contributed to January 6th. And that it's not something that's going to go away. That's sort of something deeply rooted in American consciousness across the spectrum, but with different expressions, obviously, on the left and the right. I asked Rich Levine to join us tonight. He is our constitutional law professor extraordinaire, and so can help us with some of the original sources and historical context, as well as thoughtful reflections on how to navigate the landscape in that sense. But I thought we'd start by saying, like, when you hear the phrase American exceptionalism, sort of what's the first thing that comes to mind? How would you sort of an initial knee-jerk definition? What is American exceptionalism? Why is it relevant? And we can hear you pretty well on Zoom too, so feel free to unmute or to put a response in the chat as you're Anybody want to start us off?
Well, I guess one thing that I think of is that, we're really good at a lot of things that we do that makes us exceptional.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Rabbi, this is Anshul.
Yes, Anshul. Glad to have you here.
Thank
what do you
you.
got?
Well, if you break it down, American, we're all American. I mean, those that are citizens. And then exceptionalism, I think that's a little narcissistic. I don't know. It's just that, people are good at certain things and people aren't good at certain things. So where does that criteria break off into black and white or gray areas? It doesn't make sense to me yet.
Thank you. Happy to lead with a question. So, You're also, your first reaction could be a question like that. Does it make sense? How does it make sense now?
I would say, oh, this is Sally. I would say we have everything that we need. We get whatever we want. And there are a lot of other countries where you can't get everything you need and want.
Okay.
One contribution I'd make is to ask, where's the ism in these answers, right? When you think of Judaism, you think of a sort of overarching theological worldview or practice. When you think of existentialism, it's got some tenets to it, or most of the isms have some kind of prevailing worldview and philosophy to them. When I work on this concept and I hear from others, and I hope everyone can hear me, what I don't hear of much is the ism. In chosenness, right, there's going to be some overarching first principles. You have a theological worldview, there's a relationship with God, right? And there's some purpose in the relationship. When you think about American exceptionalism, I've not met people who tell me what the ism part is of it. So you think to yourself, the noun is poorly constructed, that in fact, what people are talking about is the outcome. They're saying, we went to the moon and we're the strongest military and we have lots of money, right? What I wonder about is, where's the meat on the bone, or where's the bone?
Nice. Okay, great.
I think there's another meaning to exceptional. And the other meaning is more related to different. The exception to the rule, which is something contrary to and that one of the origins of the sense of, for me at least, American exceptionalism has to do with some of the founding principles were at the time very different than what was going on in the world around them. Not necessarily implying better or worse, or excellence, as opposed to exception. And the ism then, for me, then would be being different, a different set of values, a different approach to life, a different whatever, that kind of thing. We hold these truths. Was at the time seen as an unusual statement, I think. Exceptional in that sense. So,
All men created equal.
yeah.
Okay.
That is not a true statement. Sorry, Marilyn, that's not a true statement.
The ism I see is nationalism and patriotism associated with exceptionalism. And I do see it as a value statement. I see being exceptional as better than, is the connotation I read into it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know, is what is the definition of exceptional?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as you're seeing, that we can have several different definitions. That's partly what I want to tease out, and to sort of become aware of what are the assumptions that we're bringing to the table we may not even be aware of, sort of unconscious bias about what we mean by that phrase or how we hear that phrase.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marilyn and Irv. Anyone else?
I kind of stepped over Marilyn, but I would like to say that our country is not equal. It's not. In my world, it's not.
Yeah, no, thank you also. just because it articulates some ideals doesn't mean it lived up to them or has yet lived up to them. Yeah, Ellen.
When you ask, what's the first thing you think of? The first thought I had was The Ugly American,
The Ugly American.
which was, it's before your time, but it was a book in the 60s, probably,
50s.
50s and 60s, that really highlighted the ways in which Americans stepped on other people's, other countries, other civilizations, and had the were seen by others outside of America as being narcissistic, we use Ansel's word, caring much more about us than anybody else.
Mhm. Thank you. It tied into the sort of colonialism, is that part of it?
It was
And-
colonialism, it was also, we're better than.
Uh-huh.
I have a question for Anshul. She said he said he thought that that he thought that the United States of America was not equal. How are we not equal?
Let me give you an example. If I was to go to Florida and see my twin sister, I would be arrested if I used the wrong bathroom. If I, well, it's just not equal in the sense that you don't have to worry about when you go to the potty in a public place. You don't have to worry about that in Florida. It's not equal in the sense that transgender people are now put under the microscope and were treated differently. That's not equal. I'm not protected under the law. Even the most recent Supreme Court case that had to do with the person from Colorado, I'm questioning whether or not that was even legal to substantiate the actual outcome. I'm questioning what happens to the Supreme Court when they make a mistake. They're the Supreme Court. I mean, how do you take care of that? But in my world and in my view, including when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, at the end, I say liberty and justice for some. And I say the some really loud because it is not equal for all citizens and all people that were born here. And in my world, it's getting worse.
Mhm.
And Marilyn, thank you for correcting the pronoun.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So we will, maybe the first level of differentiation that will be helpful is that when we talk about an exceptional nation, and I'll use that generic term, people, nation, because we can apply it both to the Jewish people and also to American identity, that we can, some will turn to, like Sally, the reality on the ground seems exceptional. There's, we have so many options at the grocery store. We can get anything we want. We have all these freedoms. Some of us have all these freedoms that are distinct in terms of comparing to other countries around the world, or that seem to be. So there's a reality on the ground that is a sort of evidence of exceptional, a unique or distinctive nation. And we can also turn to, and there are others who will turn to, it's not necessarily the reality on the ground, but the ideals, the principles. Is there a difference between principle and practice, right? In principle, there may be unique, especially early on in the founding of this country and in the founding of the Jewish people, some unique or distinctive principles that, so the Israelites, when they left Egypt, they weren't all of a sudden like everybody's equal and free and treated, citizen and stranger abiding by the same rules. Like so the principles in the Torah weren't necessarily applied. That's why we have all the stories of rebellion and breaking the rules. So, but the principles underlying it, like the rule of law rather than the rule of a pharaoh or a king, as a distinctive principle in its time, that could legitimately be called exceptional. And then this other notion that came out is, that many regard the notion of exceptionalism as a value judgment, as better than, right? Just because, and so is it about just difference and uniqueness, or is it about a scale of hierarchy of value, better or worse? And when we talk about American exceptionalism in the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s and 50s, where you have these neo-Nazi groups and of course Nazi Germany arising, we saw the notion of exceptionalism. At the time, Germany was, the most powerful and advanced in engineering and technology country in the world, right? That fed into a superiority complex, right? The sense of Aryan nation as, innately superior to other races. And so we can see that there's this fine line, and what Mordecai Kaplan saw as a dangerous line between the notion of exceptionalism and the notion of supremacy, like racial supremacy, white supremacy. So that's the sort of challenge, this sort of it's both a paradox and a challenge, that on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with and every individual, I think, soul and collective group wants to feel special and unique, exceptional in something, right? Something that I excel at uniquely, or that we as a congregation excel at, or that we as a country or state are distinctive and unique, right? They say, don't launch a venture unless you can do it well. So there's this aspect of a sense of specialness and uniqueness, right? In fact, the word Zion means essentially exceptional, right? When you put Mitsuyan as a grade in a paper in Hebrew, it means excellent, right? Exceptional work, right? So we want to be able to reward and celebrate exceptional musicians and poets and artists and thinkers and athletes and etc. And we also are acutely aware, in the wake of the Holocaust, in the wake of January 6th and the threats of white supremacy, that a superiority complex, right, of thinking, of translating as just exceptional as better and more valuable, is morally problematic and dangerous for society.
So, Rabbi, why are all these people from, I don't know, Mexico, Honduras, all these other countries risking their lives to come here if they didn't think it was something better? I don't get it. I think they should stay where they are. They have wonderful things where they are, and we have good things and we have bad things. every place has good things and bad things. I
Mhm.
mean, maybe it's just the media that keeps saying America's the greatest country in the world. I'm not so sure. We maybe some of the things that we have, but what makes America the greatest country in the world?
And that notion, right, that phrase, America is the greatest country in the world, is one that is used by politicians, conservative, progressive, across the spectrum. So that notion of, exceptional is written into the fabric of American identity. And if we can agree that there is a danger in that notion becoming corrupted into a sense of superiority, right? Feeding white supremacy, perpetuating systemic racism, then we have some work to do in terms of uncovering it. And I think that's the conversation I'd like to have tonight, is about what are there aspects of the sense of American exceptional, what is exceptional about the American enterprise that are worthy of retaining and perpetuating, and if so, how to do that in a way that doesn't perpetuate. Yeah, Rich.
So I think Sally gives the opportunity through her observation, if it's a question, right? It seemed to end in a question mark. And so here's what I'll observe back into the conversation, is that the country that financed the Revolutionary War was France. And the country that gifted the Statue of Liberty, which, if there's a central animating focus to the ethos of America, it's freedom or it's liberty, they gave the Statue of Liberty. And Alexis de Tocqueville is a Frenchman who came to the United States and wrote Democracy in America in the roughly the middle of the 1800s, prior to the Civil War, but after the War of 1812, in which American exceptionalism, if it is any sort of philosophical doctrine, gets its birthright. But inscribed on the Statue of Liberty is the poem by Emma Lazarus that says, "Give us your tired, your wretched, your huddled poor, yearning to breathe free." And so, Sally, if there's an ethos to American exceptionalism, it's welcoming those persons who come from places of dungeons of darkness, as it were, and who are seeking more light, more freedom, more expressive opportunities, more economic opportunities. And if there is one thing that is exceptional about America, it's people like my ancestors who came through Ellis Island, escaping horrors in Europe, and today's modern equivalent, people who are coming from places like Honduras or other countries through Mexico, who are similarly seeking access. And the most exceptionally American component of that, if you look back through history, is that we are a melting pot of people who came from other places. In the 1600s, when the Pilgrims, Jamie mentioned the Pilgrims, came across, it's really the first place that you see the birth of this idea of the merging between a chosenness idea out of the Old Testament and American exceptionalism. And that the person who led that expedition of pilgrims that ended up leaving Old England and settling New England said, "Hey, listen, we're a group of Puritans, and we are going to be an example, and people are going to look to us, and we need to make ourselves exceptional, because the world is going to judge us according to what we do. And we have an obligation, if we want to be known as people of God," right? This is the birthplace of this idea, if it actually has a birthplace. And I'll put an asterisk there, because this whole idea and the pretense that it comes from de Tocqueville or it comes from the Pilgrims in 1610 is largely mythological. It comes essentially from Newt Gingrich in 1980. And so it has a very short lifespan, and it's a bumper sticker in search of an ism. But if you want to give it its, if you want to give 1980 any sort of credence, then it goes back to de Tocqueville, which goes back to the 1610s. But that's my response, Sally, is that I think you are a nation of immigrants, of people who are searching for liberty and who are not trying to identify based on the color of their skin or based on the creed or nationality that they come from, but in the shared ethos of aspiring to have freedom of expression and freedom of economic opportunity. Those are the two prevailing cultural components that seem to be expressed in the history, my opinion.
So freedom of expression and freedom of economic opportunity. And
Seems to be.
yeah, that's what we landed on too, and we were having this conversation earlier. I saw that Tara wrote, in terms of defining exceptionalism, I think unique, perhaps different, perhaps great.
I caution unique, by the way, and that word's come up several times because excellence doesn't imply uniqueness. Uniqueness is exclusionary. That we have something that's the definition of unique, is that no one else has it. And that is sort of bad social science. We don't have something that no other country has, either in terms of the people or in terms of the governmental structure, right? Or in terms of our affluence. I don't think those things are.
Could you say this is, well, we do have a unique history that has sort of grounded those principles? I mean, that you articulated that the sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I think this when paired with the word exceptional, though, one needs to be careful because that same unique history is one that led to the genocide of Native Americans, 400,000 slaves coming across the Atlantic, turning into a population of 4 million, right? The internment of Japanese Americans, right? That
Exceptionally terrible things.
well, I would say that you're right that it has that it is a uniquely American experience because it happened here. But Canada is similar, right? Geographically similar, right?
Sure, and I think if the Hebrew text is the Torah is going to be instructive in some way, the creation of a mythology around this band of mixed multitude who left slavery in Egypt and wandered for 40 years to a promised land. That wasn't the history for most of the Jews. For most of the Israelites weren't actually. There was, history tells us they sort of came from all over. And not just sort of all went down to Egypt as slaves. They just sort of coalesced around a particular story. And the same could be true, because said about American history, that this mythology about, pilgrims and religious freedom and expression that we, celebrate on Thanksgiving is one that was crafted to try to weave together a sense of shared identity among a nation of immigrants, who came for many different reasons, many of them fleeing, many of them in bondage, not free, but still trying to united by the story.
Jamie, almost about 18 years ago, you wrote an article I read that described essentially these components of civilization as the three-legged stool of land, law, and lore, right? So you have America, the land. You have, this governmental structure that we're talking about that, gets expressed through the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or 14th Amendment, whatever focus you might have. And then the lore, like, we're the pilgrims. That's who we got to be. And then, this ties to your themes on Israel, right? And chosenness.
Exactly. I want to welcome everybody, Claudia, Ruthie, Cindy, Mark, anyone who hasn't spoken yet. Irv, do you have comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to apologize to Angela. I knew you when you were a woman, and it takes me a long time to process. Unfortunately, too long.
My transition is not just about me, it's about the people that I am around. So thank you
I-
for saying that, even though you didn't have to.
I understand what you're saying, and and I agree with you. But the reason I want to talk is because I wanted to say that it seems like every organization, whether it's American or South American or whatever, they all feel, in my opinion, they all feel that what their laws and traditions are correct for them. And it seems like, typically it's the majority rules. Unfortunately, in some cases, the majority says that we don't want to hear from this group of people or this group of people. And I feel like whatever the country is, they feel that their value system is right. And like we don't accept murderers as being a part of a good group, because it's dangerous to everyone else who's not a murderer. And I feel like there are countries that are so hierarchical that they feel that they're right, and it manages to make it okay to murder somebody in a war to prove that their value is right and the person who they're warring with is wrong. So I feel like exceptionalism is like a very blurry word, and I feel like I don't want to say that our country is exceptional. I feel like every country has their value system, and the majority accepts it.
Yeah, thank you, Irv. I would love to delve into sort of in the American story and in the Jewish story, what are ways from the beginning that have been embedded in the story that have helped create a buffer to protect this, to encourage and celebrate the sense of distinctiveness, if not, right? And aspects or traits that are worthy of celebration and praise, and the sense of superiority, sort of that guard us from that sense of we have the only truth and we have exclusive right to decision making. I think the one aspect, like in the in the original documents, the notion of that Dick raised around, we hold these truths to be self-evident, is not these are absolute truths. It's that, right? That's a statement that we are agreeing to abide by these as if they are true, which is a soft way of declaring one's principles. It's not, it doesn't feel to me exclusive of other potential truths that other communities couldn't place as self-evident and prominent for the community. And if you think of the 10 Commandments, or texts from the Torah of the Israelites gathering around shared principles and shared experience, I think likewise you could say that about I, Adonai, am your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I'm your God. It's not, and then you have some of the danger exceptionalism of Jewish exceptionalism turning superior in what we call the Deuteronomic Isaiah voices. So there are later writers that have texts in the Torah that are destroy the altars of other people. You can't intermarry, that you need to stay separate and they're not equal, right? The same genocidal tendencies that we saw in this country, we see in the Torah as well. So what are the buffers in our sacred texts, both Constitution, the American text, and biblical texts, that help us create a buffer for that danger? And that's an invitation to share what, you know, your own experience, your own or questions around that theme.
Specifically, what?
What are some aspects of Judaism or the founding sort of principles and texts of the American enterprise that we can turn to prevent or to act as a buffer against racial supremacy or and that tendency that is an outgrowth, evidenced outgrowth of exceptionalism as a concept, as an identity trait.
So I'll argue against type here for a minute. The best part of this concept is the invitation to not be legalistic and to not focus on government and not to think about the Constitution as the central definition of what we're doing. The term is American exceptionalism, and so it's not US exceptionalism. So, it's not really about, de Tocqueville is not really writing about government and law. In fact, de Tocqueville is writing about the American experience as community, right? Common purpose, community, or culture. And so if you want to guard against the alienation around legal divisions, right? Then think about artists, or think about authors, or think about poets or activists, right? Think about America in the broader cultural context, more so than in the institutional levers of power. That's useful to me. So I'd rather think about Maya Angelou than about George Washington when this question arises. I'd rather think about inventors or business ventures than I would about who happens to have given a speech in the United States Senate. And if there's an American institution that reflects America, then it's going to be elementary schools. Right? It's going to be kids playing together, kids reading books, kids learning. That to me feels much more about public education for all, feels like the truest aspect of American exceptionalism that I can come up with, not the military. I don't need other people, I don't need other cultures copying the Constitution as much as I need other cultures having a fully integrated, heterogeneous, free public education for all persons in their countries.
Yeah, so what aspects of Jewish history or Jewish community, Jewish peoplehood, and American peoplehood or American culture do we turn to generate and sustain our sense of pride, collective sense of pride, right? Marilyn talked about nationalism and patriotism. So I think it does matter where we turn in terms of that. I think about so often I hear among secular Jews their expression of Jewish pride is in how many Nobel laureates were Jewish, right? It's singing to Maya Angelou, right? And there's, I think Laura mentioned this idea that we all have the same colored blood, different stories and different upbringings, but we have compassion, and that what we take pride in is something we generate as a collective enterprise that that isn't diminishing anyone else in the process or any other nation, right? When you turn to military for your sense of pride, then what gives us is conquest, right? Winning a war, and there's going to be a loser. But, somebody inventing a new, advancement in technology, or creating an incredible, beautiful piece of art, a poem or music, does not, those aren't limited resources. That it doesn't deprive anyone else or put anyone else down in the process. In order to think about, I wanted to invite us to look at some of the process within the Reconstructionist movement of how they addressed this question, and did it in the 40s. As the reality of the Holocaust was coming to bear. I'll also mention, we sort of July, right, the 4th of July yesterday, and celebrating the independence of this country, of America from England. There were how many shootings and, in dozens of cities around the country, that there's a shadow side, right? That this country is exceptional in a lot of ways, and gun violence is perhaps the most evident and evidenced that we're seeing right now. And in the Jewish calendar, tomorrow is the 17th of Tammuz, which is the beginning of 3 weeks of the siege of Jerusalem that remembers the essentially destruction of Jerusalem under Babylonian army. In other words, the fall of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, which was never fully recovered. And so inviting us to look at Jewish calendar invites us and encourages us to look at the shadow side of Jewish history, and the repercussions of not living up to these values that around which we rally to create a sort of Jewish identity. So I'm going to try to do a screen share, and you can pass around the prayer books. I'm pretty sure it's on page 398, 396. So this is from the prayer book, looking at the Reconstructionist, they're looking at the Torah blessings. So the blessings that are recited before and after the reading of the Torah, at every Torah service, the traditional blessings, include the phrase, "Blessed are you, Adonai our God, who chose us from among the nations to give us the Torah. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato," to give us your Torah. It's worth noting that this notion of chosenness comes with a sense of responsibility, not just privilege. We are the recipients of a gift and an obligation at the same time. And so the fundamental to this is the concept of brit, or covenant. That what we are chosen, it's like a marriage or sort of a business partnership, that you're entering into a covenantal agreement. That's what we're chosen for, not chosen for some special privilege without responsibility. They're paired. And here in the commentary, at the beneath the line here, see if I can enlarge it a bit. I can see it better. The 1945 Reconstructionist prayer book. So this was really the first of the really dramatic reforms of the liturgy, eliminated all references to Jewish chosenness for both ideological and moral reasons. Chosenness posits a God who chooses, and it supports claims of national superiority. So that's careful language there, right? It posits a God who chooses, which and supports them. This isn't necessary. It isn't determined. It isn't determining a sense of superiority. You can read chosenness as not implying national superiority, but it does support claims of that. And thus the prayer book's Torah blessings replace the Hebrew phrase Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim, who has chosen us from all the peoples, with Asher Kervanu La'avodato, who has drawn us to your service. So it's a prominent phrase using, so many of you are familiar with this change, but I haven't talked about it all that much recently. Asher Kervanu La'avodato, who draws us close to your service. So, and the prayer book follows the 1945 version, but provides alternatives in the commentary on the facing page. So what is the process that led to this change? I want to say a little bit about. The process is called functional reevaluation. And when Kaplan identified an aspect of Jewish tradition or story or law that not just him, but we collectively found as morally problematic, we didn't just excise it from the tradition. What you first had to do was, what we say in Nusar, dam the kapsakut, judge it on the side of merit. Assume that the authors of this original phrase, liturgical phrase, and in fact it's borrowed from the Bible, so it could go back to Moses here, that they had good intention, that they did it for noble reasons, not to imply superiority, etc. So what would have been the positive reason? What would have been, judging on the side of merit, the function? This is the functional reevaluation. What was the function of that phrase liturgically? Why would our ancestors and our siblings, in other sister congregations, say every Torah service, "Blessed are you, God, who chose us from among all other nations to give us the Torah"? Why would they say that as a ritual act, as a spiritual practice?
So there's a presumption that there's a motive to it. And other than it simply being the premise of, well, that was the truth.
It's what?
That was the truth.
That was the truth.
Right?
There's lots of truths that could be articulated in that moment of preparing to read the Torah. So why say it that way? So Tara writes to reinforce a sense of duty. Responsibility, duty. Why does a child say to their sibling, well, mom gave me this for my birthday, right? Or I'm my parents' favorite.
You talked about the sense of feeling exception. You need to feel as if you were exceptional.
Yes, or at the very least, sort of special, right? Like something distinctive and, that distinctive about me that makes me deserving of affection and gift, right? Of blessing. And one way to say that is, I got a better Torah than anybody else.
Rabbi, how about God likes me better than you people? That's basically what you're saying. Mom likes me better than you. That's why I got this gift, not the other.
Okay, so but why do we need to say that sometimes? Or why do we sometimes feel the need to say that?
Because nobody else, according to God and his word, nobody else wanted the responsibility, and we were the ones that took it.
So that's a midrash. Thank you. So that's sort of this, and that's exactly the question I was asking earlier that you were saying, get more specific, right? I was saying, what are the sources in the text and in our tradition that create a buffer? So the pshat, the sort of straightforward reading of the text says, God just sought us out and said, I want Abraham, I'm going to help Moses. I'm going to give my Torah to them. And I'm going to bring plagues upon the Egyptians, and I'm going to tell, I'm going to scatter the Canaanites so that you can have the promised land. It doesn't look like God has really consulted other or been as generous or gracious to other nations in the pshat of the text. But among many midrashim that want to soften that are concerned about that exceptionalism leading to a sense of superiority, they say, no, God actually offered the Torah to every other nation on earth, and they all refused. There's some jokes built in there, like, I'm okay with, commandments 1, 2, 3, and 4, but no adultery, not good on that one. No thanks. Or, we like coveting our neighbors' things, etc. So, so they say there's a phrase that, that the Israelites stood tachat hahar, that they stood under the mountain, is what the preposition seems to imply, rather than at the foot of the mountain when God gave the Torah. So this midrash says, so God suspended the mountain on a thread and suspended it over the Israelites, threatening to drop it on them if they didn't accept the Torah. So it's nothing about us as humans, about us as Jews, that made us special, better than any other nation. And even some of the prophets say, so you were chosen to leave Egypt. That's fine. The Ethiopians were chosen to leave Cush, and God liberates other nations as well. Yeah,
but there was a covenant prior to the Torah.
Noah, you're referring to?
Abraham.
Or Abraham,
Right.
Sure.
So there's a covenantal relationship selected, right, prior to Torah. So there's some kind of incubation period of, right, evolutionary incubation from family to tribe to community that resolves into a text that says, here's how you're going to align yourselves.
And what's, sort of the ways that we distinguish between the covenant with Abraham and the covenant with Moses, or the people of Israel, is that the covenant with Abraham is a bloodline, right? The circumcision is the sign, right? You draw blood to mark that covenant, and it's a family promise bound. The covenant with Israel is not bound by family, that it is inclusive of, mixed multitude. Anyone can be part of the covenant with Israel. So that's a distinctive quality, and that may be part of what, we were talking about earlier, distinctive about the American narrative around, all men are created equal. Now, I was only referring to white men over 21 who owned land, but at the time, but this notion of wherever you come from, what other family you came from, whatever religion you're you're from, you have equal standing among the law. Again, as a ideal in process.
So that's a very different chosenness than a bloodline chosenness.
Indeed. Indeed.
I would wonder too, though, how did the covenant with Abraham happen? Did God choose him because he was special and better, or was it some other kind of deal?
Yeah. So here's another buffer within. So we have the midrash that God offered the Torah to all the countries, all the nations first. We have this notion of the distinctive aspect of covenant that's not bound by race or family, bloodline. And there's, before even you get to Abraham, there's Noah. There's a covenant with Noah, who is the progenitor of all humanity. And the symbol of that covenant is the rainbow. And it lays down 7 laws, responsibilities of human beings, of the B'nai Noach, the children of Noah. And in exchange, God won't destroy the world with a flood again. And there's very little that's said about Noah, and there's nothing that's said about Avram that lets you know why they were chosen. So again, many midrashim, it does say that Noah was an ish tam. So some describe it as a righteous or simple. He was innocent, without ill will, right? So that, maybe that is a trait of Noah that led to the covenant with God. But there's nothing said about Avram, about his personality. He was 75 years old when, God told him to go to a country, leave his homeland. So those are all aspects of, it's not something unique about Abraham or Noah or me or, the Jewish people or Americans, people who happen to live in this country, that is innately superior. And that is reinforced in countless ways in Jewish tradition, in terms of a corrective to chosenness. And to come back to the Torah blessing, right? The phrase, who chose us from among all other nations. So to do functional reevaluation of a tradition like that. So first identifying the function, right? Tara wrote that it feels good. It feels good to feel special, right? And so the sense of feeling special or close to God, right? You feel special when you get a gift of new glass holders from Sally. You get chosen to get a special gift, right? So it feels good to be a recipient.
Where are they? Where are they?
So we want that. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? That's a human need and acknowledges that need. So to reconstruct the traditional blessing, we try to fulfill the same function, that being to make us feel special and good. And to remove from the phrase something that implies or supports any claim of moral or innate superiority. So the phrase, so why do you need to say, you can say, I'm chosen by God. Why do you need to say from everyone else? my biblical Hebrew teacher says, what's the problem with that? It's like, I chose one apple from the tree. Among all the apples of the tree, I chose that one, right? It's not, that didn't necessarily imply a moral hierarchy, but it can certainly be read to. You know, I'm better than me, Cole can be that too, right? I'm the favorite among all of the other nations. God chose me.
Well,
So-
the third person looks at the apples and says, you guys don't need to worry about it. But if you're one of the other apples,
Nice. Yes, you're like, thank you for choosing, unless you wanted to be eaten, but that was, yeah, so to take out that phrase, the Jewish renewal community does, instead of mi kol ha'amim, chose us from all other nations, says im kol ha'amim, chose us with all other nations. The Reconstructionist approach of instead of taking out the word for choosing altogether because of the problematic anthropomorphic notion of the divine, of a God that chooses and has, you know, wills like human beings that will, to use the sense of feeling drawn close to God, kirvanu, and drawn into service. And that reinforces the sense of responsibility or duty rather than privilege. Right? So you're emphasizing the responsibility rather than the privilege. And that, I think, is a really helpful corrective to national exceptionalism. Right? That when what makes America exceptional is the things that it bestows upon me, that's the privilege. When what makes America exceptional is the calling to be of service, that's kirvanu la'avodato.
ask not.
Ask not what your country can do for you, exactly, what you can do for your country. So that's the process. So coming up with this new phrase that fulfills the same function, makes us feel good, makes us feel special, a closeness to the divine or divine calling, without making us reinforcing a sense of superiority, which is not good for our souls, and it's not good for our relations with other human beings. Right? Nobody likes to hang out with somebody who thinks they're better than everyone else. And it doesn't serve me, it doesn't serve my moral growth if I think that, if I carry that forward. Nice. I was drawn to this service, this lens for engaging in the world. That's, Terry, your translation of the phrase, I assume? Right. So the next step is, you know, it's a little after 8, so we'll do another 10 minutes or so. Just thought, so is there a way to apply this sort of core Reconstructionist principle? By the way, this is an application of the Reconstructionist principle that the past has a vote, but not a veto. Right? The tradition, even if it might imply that it's got a hierarchy or that it might feed into a sense of superiority or, you know, racism of some, you know, or, you know, the worst kind of exceptionalism, doesn't mean you don't give it a vote. You give it a vote at the table, but it doesn't have a veto. We don't have to do it just because that's what tradition has done. This, by the way, has other applications in terms of keeping kosher. You know, what are the purposes for the kosher laws, separating meat and milk or things like that? What's the function? And if I'm going to choose a different diet or a different approach or a hierarchy of values around my dietary conscious, you do them based on the same process, this functional reevaluation. So the question is, can we apply the same process to the American narrative and to our American identity? Are there aspects of American practice that are potentially problematic that we might engage those traditions and reconstruct them using this process of functional reevaluation?
So when, again, sort of drawn back to, if you're gonna look at the core legal institution, if one wants to look at that, I can give you two things. One is that it's also contractual, right? That you say it's a covenant, or you're explaining and discussing that it's a covenant in the chosenness aspect, that you're drawn to it and then you agree to it, and then you perform it. The idea of the Constitution is that it's a social contract. In other words, it's not dominating to you, it's an agreement to which you subscribe. But one of the exceptional qualities to it, according to some, right, and relevant people still today, is that it is intentionally dysfunctional. That the fractionation of power into a bicameral legislative body elected separately from an executive body, administered separately from a judicial body, is intentionally frustrating authority. In other words, it's saying to individuals, you must participate, you must be, part of this process, because a king or a dictator would certainly be more efficient, right? A concentration of power into a unicameral system with no federalism would yield much more efficient results. You might not like them, but choice matters, right? So participation matters, choice matters. So this drawing you into this process, inefficient though it is, that's where you have to be with it. That's the flaws are baked into the mechanism. It's a poorly running car.
And it functions as a buffer,
right,
to, sort of an imperialist sort of, mode, right? If this sort of sense of superiority had taken over the executive branch, for instance, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be able to implement like the Nazi regime was able to do, right? So there's a legal buffer and a structural buffer in terms of the governance to that happening.
So is Judaism messy too?
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever find we question authority?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And a dispersion
Yeah,
of authority.
yeah. Who do you look to in Judaism for the right answer?
You don't have a pope.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the sort of the impulse around democracy as what distinguished rabbinic Judaism from biblical Judaism. Does that make sense to folks? In the Bible, you have prophets, priests, and kings. They were in charge. And, they had, their power was sometimes distributed, and balanced, but sometimes not. And when the temple was destroyed, all three of those went away. No more prophecy, no more priests, and no more kings, no more Jewish kings. So we needed a completely different system of governance, organizational structure for the community. And that's when you have what we call rabbinic Judaism, of a Sanhedrin, basically a Congress of lawyers, of rabbis, to deliberate, and the introduction of the sense of majority rule. So it was a meritocracy. You became a rabbi through learning, not through birthright, like priests or kings, or even prophecy, like chosen by God randomly, but through something measurable and intellectual merit. And then the decision-making process, the jurisprudence, was adjudicated through majority rule of the court, of the judges on the court. So it democratized the system completely in the time of Hillel Shammai, so over 2,000 years ago. So you could consider it a different, really a different religion. It's completely a different structure. And there's, you could see some of the best aspects of that revolution were adopted by the American system in terms of the democratic rule. And then in Reconstructionist, movement has reinvigorated the sense of democratic decision-making, collective decision-making process, rather than the rabbi making all the decisions, or, the synagogue president, or what have you. So I wasn't sure where this conversation was going to go and how it would unfold. So thank you for that surprise, and for being a part of it. It would have been a very dull conversation if it was just me. This was a great group. Anybody with some final comments or thoughts they want to leave, share before we adjourn for the night?
Can my voice be heard?
Please, yes.
Oh, good. I've been pushing buttons. I wasn't sure if it was working or not. I just want to say thank you. I'm a new member of the synagogue, brand spanking new. And yeah, I'm very excited. I'm originally from Muncie, New York. And now living here, Muncie. I know that's an interesting town. Anyhow, I'm excited to be part of the synagogue. It's something very new for me, and I'm excited. So thank you very much.
Wonderful, Ruthie, welcome. Thank you for joining the community and doing exactly this covenantal partnership that we've been talking about that makes us exceptional. Thank you. Anyone else with the closing comment? All right. Well, friends,
Is America exceptional, or is it not? Is it only exceptional in the eyes of some and not others? I mean, the people in France, maybe they think they're exceptional. So does it really matter? You said something earlier about white supremacy, which I don't know what that is, and I don't really see it. So, we just move along in our daily lives, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I think certainly what I imagine Mordecai Kaplan would say is that if the notion of American exceptionalism brings out the best in us, then sure, let's keep it part of our national narrative. If it brings out the worst in us, then we need to reconstruct it. And I think it's worth looking carefully at how the notion of American exceptionalism has been and is still being parroted, and how it's being acted upon in very real ways. That many of us are very concerned about. So that's why I think it's. I wouldn't say it's a principle concept that has no redeeming value whatsoever. But I think if we're going to employ it, we should do so carefully, mindfully. Is that fair? All right, we have lots of stuff happening in the coming weeks. Friday night is we have a Friday night service, our first, hopefully, service out in the amphitheater, which has some newly updated landscaping and lighting, and Laura Berman will be joining me, and hopefully others, and it'll be the 18th anniversary of my first service here at Beth Evergreen. So a worthy partnership to continue to celebrate. And we have an annual meeting next week for the congregation, and several events this on Saturday. We have Torah study and hosting a Chamber of Commerce thing. So anyway, look at your calendars, lots going on if you have more. And softball game tomorrow night is the next big thing. Come on and cheer for the Hebrew Nationals. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.